Well, we are now, of course, into night 5 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old with a heart condition. Last night, we showed you that Savannah Guthrie sat between her sister Annie and her brother Cameron in that video as she released a prepared statement, her voice shaking so much. And today, Cameron reiterating those pleas in another post.
We haven't heard anything directly. We need you to reach out, and we need a way to communicate with you so we can move forward.
A ransom note received Monday by a local Tucson TV station included a demand for money with a deadline set for 5 p.m. today and a second deadline for Monday. Tonight, investigators are laying out a detailed timeline of the time period when they believed Nancy Guthrie was abducted. She had dinner and game night Saturday evening at her daughter Annie's nearby home, arriving by Uber. Police interviewed the Uber driver. Authorities say the family brought her home just before 10 at 9:48 p.m. 4 hours later, at 1:47 a.m., a doorbell camera was disconnected. At 2:12 a.m., a Nest camera detected a possible intruder but was not set up to record images. At 2:28, Nancy's pacemaker app disconnected from her phone, which was left behind in the home. The FBI also concerned about hoaxes. Tonight, the Justice Department has charged a California man for allegedly texting the Guthrie family demanding Bitcoin. He is not linked to ransom demands that were left with local media outlets, according to court records.
To those imposters who are trying to take advantage and profit from this situation, we will investigate and ensure you are held accountable for your actions.
Now, the FBI has issued a $50,000 reward for credible information about that abduction. And as for a motive, investigators do not know whether Nancy Guthrie was targeted because her daughter, of course, is one of television's most visible news anchors. The sheriff says, "My guesswork is as good as yours."
She is 84 years old. She is in her pajamas. She has no shoes. She has no medication. And somewhere in the dark, she cannot hear a single word being said to her. That is where this story begins. Not at the beginning, in the middle, in the worst moment, the moment everything went wrong. Savannah Guthrie sat in front of a camera and said the words no child should ever have to say out loud. She said, "I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry. If it is me, I'm so sorry." She was apologizing to her mother, a woman she could not find, a woman nobody could find. And the thing that broke her, the thing that made her voice crack on national television, was the possibility that her own name, her own face on a morning show, had put a target on an 84-year-old woman sleeping alone in the Arizona desert. If someone came for Nancy Guthrie in the dead of night, they knew exactly which cameras to disable. They knew exactly which doors to prop open. They knew exactly where she slept. And when it was over, they sent a letter, not demanding more money, not threatening consequences, an apology. They said they did not realize how fragile she was. That letter is the most disturbing document in this entire case, and nobody has explained what it actually means. Until now. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Let us get into it. 1:47 a.m., a doorbell camera at a residential property in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood north of Tucson, Arizona goes offline. According to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, who confirmed this at the official February 5th press conference, the camera disconnected at that exact time. Not a power cut. As not a technical malfunction. The camera went offline, and based on FBI Director Kash Patel's subsequent statement, it appears the device was tampered with. An IT expert named Nigel Nielsen, speaking to KPRC2 News, later pointed out something investigators may not have anticipated when that camera went dark. Because the homeowner had no active subscription, the Google Nest system had been continuously overwriting its own footage. Disconnecting the camera actually stopped that overwriting process. Whatever had been recorded up to that moment was, in a technical sense, safer after the camera went offline than it would have been if it had kept running. The person who disabled that camera may have inadvertently preserved the very evidence that would be used to identify them. The house goes silent to the outside world. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., a second camera on the same property registers something. Its motion detection software detects a person moving on the grounds, but there is still no footage to review. That system had also been continuously overwriting itself without an active subscription. Whatever moved through that property left no viewable image behind in real time. Then at 2:28 a.m., a cardiac pacemaker loses its connection to a monitoring app on an iPhone sitting inside the house. A pacemaker transmits remotely to a home-based unit via Bluetooth. When the person wearing it moves beyond the range of that connection, the app registers a disconnect. At 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, that connection dropped. The person wearing that pacemaker had left the building. 41 minutes, from 1:47 a.m. to 2:28 a.m. That is the verified abduction window, confirmed by official timestamps released by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. That is the interval investigators built the entire timeline of this case around. Everything that matters in this investigation happened inside those 41 minutes in a house that, by the following afternoon, would be described by law enforcement using a single word: immaculate. When investigators walked through that property on February 1st, the official word used in law enforcement statements and later confirmed to News Nation's Brian Enton by a source close to the investigation was immaculate. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no objects displaced from their positions, no signs of a struggle or confrontation anywhere inside the residence. Every room was exactly as the woman who lived there had left it before she went to bed the night before. 3 back doors were propped open using flower pots taken from the homeowner's own patio. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her purse was on the counter with the cash inside untouched. Her car sat in the garage. Nothing of financial value had been taken. On the front porch there was blood. Sheriff Nanos confirmed at a press conference that DNA testing matched that blood to the missing woman. Bloodstain pattern analysis expert Paulette Sutton, who has more than 40 years of experience and was retired from the Shelby County Medical Examiner's Office, reviewed what was publicly known about the scene. She described it to Newsweek as a drip trail, a continuous source of blood dripping from a person. Retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell went further. She told Brian Enton of News Nation that in her assessment the woman was carried out, not walked out, and that based on the blood droplet pattern, the absence of a void, and the absence of footprints, she believes 2 people were involved in removing her from the property, and on the kitchen counter, sitting exactly where the woman had left it before going to bed, was her heart medication. The evening dose, due the night before, untouched, uncollected, left behind. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly that this woman requires daily medication for a heart condition. She needed it to survive. Within days of her disappearance, ransom notes began arriving at media outlets in Tucson. The notes demanded payment in Bitcoin. Deadlines were attached. A family announced a reward of $1 million. Law enforcement from multiple agencies converged on the neighborhood. The case became national news within hours and international within days. The official framework placed on this investigation from the very beginning was kidnapping for ransom. The theory that a stranger or strangers entered this woman's home in the middle of the night and took her for money. Every public statement, every press conference, every media report was built on that foundation. But here is what that theory cannot account for. If someone entered this house for ransom, if keeping this woman alive was the only thing that gave them any leverage at all, then the medication sitting on that kitchen counter was worth more to them than anything else in that house. It was the difference between a living hostage and no leverage at all. It took 5 seconds to grab. It was right there. They did not take it. That is not a small detail. That is not a side note. That is the question at the center of this entire case. And the further you follow the physical evidence, the harder that question becomes to answer inside the ransom theory. This channel covers what major outlets have missed or buried. Subscribers to this channel had the Bitcoin ATM detail, the January 11th reconnaissance connection, and the security gate analysis before any major network covered them. If you want to follow this investigation where the evidence actually leads, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Her name is Nancy Ellen Long. She was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small city just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She attended elementary school at St. Agnes and graduated from Notre Dame Academy in 1959. She went on to the University of Kentucky, where she worked as a society editor and staff member on the student newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel. It was at the University of Kentucky where she met her future husband, Charles Errol Guthrie, on a blind date to a basketball game. She married Charles on December 28, 1963. He was a mining engineer whose career took the family across the world. They lived in Melbourne, Australia, where their youngest daughter was born in 1971. 2 years later, the family relocated to Tucson, Arizona, and settled into a home in the Catalina foothills. Nancy would not leave Tucson for the next 53 years. She and Charles had 3 children. Their oldest is Annie Guthrie, a writer, jeweler, and teacher at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. She's who has lived in Tucson her entire adult life. Their son is Charles Cameron Guthrie, who went on to serve as a pilot in the Air National Guard and later worked in military intelligence. He is also Tucson-based. Their youngest is Savannah Guthrie, who was born in Melbourne, grew up in Tucson, and became the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show in New York. Savannah's public profile is the reason this case became national news within hours of Nancy being reported missing. The facts of what happened to Nancy exist independently of her daughter's career. On June 10, 1988, Charles Guthrie died suddenly of a heart attack during a work trip to Mexico. He was 49 years old. Nancy was 46. Savannah was 16, about to begin her senior year of high school. Nancy raised all 3 children the rest of the way on her own. 2 years later, she entered the workforce. She joined the University of Arizona in 1990, where she worked in public relations and university advancement for nearly 2 decades. She served as a spokesperson for the University Medical Center, became an associate to the Vice President of University Advancement, organized a monthly performing arts program for hospital patients and staff, and ran a program that introduced Arizona high school students to careers in medicine. In 2000, she was elected president of the Southern Arizona chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. She retired on January 1, 2007. By January 2026, Nancy was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker. She relied on daily cardiac medication. She had limited mobility. She was mentally sharp, living alone in her Catalina foothills home, attending virtual church services every Sunday at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Tucson. Colleagues who worked with her for years described her as someone who had no enemies. A former University of Arizona vice provost named Elizabeth Irvin said Nancy made work upbeat and fun while being a good leader. The Catalina foothills is an affluent, quiet, unincorporated neighborhood north of Tucson. Security cameras on most homes. Neighbors who know each other's routines. The kind of place where an 84-year-old woman who has lived on the same street for decades is known, recognized, and noticed. That is who Nancy Guthrie was on the night of January 31st, 2026. A woman with 50 years of roots in one community, a career built from loss, 3 children who grew up watching her hold a family together alone, and a Sunday morning routine that had never once been interrupted without reason, until it was. Saturday evening, January 31st, 2026, began as an ordinary family visit. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy Guthrie took an Uber from her Catalina foothills home to the nearby Tucson home of her daughter Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that investigators have since interviewed that Uber driver, who cooperated fully with the investigation, shared in-car video of Nancy from the ride, and is not under any suspicion. The drive took Nancy approximately 4 miles across Tucson, from her home in the foothills to a neighborhood where her daughter and son-in-law have lived for years. Tommaso Cioni is Annie's husband and Nancy's son-in-law. He arrived in Tucson from his hometown of San Giovanni Valdarno, Italy, in 2006. Although by day he teaches 6th grade science and biology at a charter school in Tucson. Outside of teaching, he writes, studies lizards, makes homemade pasta, and plays bass and vocals in a local band. That band is called Early Black. It was formed in April 2007 when Tommaso connected with 2 other Tucson musicians through a combination of Craigslist and local newspaper advertisements. The drummer is a man named Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. The guitarist and vocalist is Walter I. Goncalves Jr. The 3 of them built a modest following in the Tucson indie scene, recording their debut album at Loveland Studios with local engineer Nathan Sabatino and playing shows across Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. That connection between Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans, forged through music nearly 2 decades ago, would become one of the most scrutinized details of this entire investigation. That evening, Nancy had dinner and spent several hours at Annie and Tommaso's home. When the visit ended, Tommaso drove her back himself. At 9:48 p.m., the garage door at Nancy's Catalina Foothills home opened. At 9:50 p.m., it closed. Sheriff Nanos referenced those two timestamps specifically in his first press conference. His exact words were, "It is at that time we assume that Nancy is home and probably going to bed." Tommaso waited until the door closed before driving away. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie by any person. From 9:50 p.m. onward, the verified record of what happened inside that house goes completely silent for more than 4 hours. Sometime around midnight, data later recovered by FBI forensic teams working with Google shows that a masked individual first appeared in the system tied to Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera. This was not publicly known for 10 days. The camera had no active subscription, which meant the device had been continuously overwriting its own recordings. The footage was nearly gone. It took more than a week of work between FBI technicians and Google engineers to recover it from residual data stored in the back end of the Nest system. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, Nancy's doorbell camera disconnected. This timestamp was confirmed by Sheriff Nanos at his official February 5th press conference. At 2:12 a.m., a second camera on the property registered a person through its motion detection software. There was no viewable footage. The system had been overwriting continuously, and without a subscription, nothing had been preserved in the standard way. Nanos noted at the time that the movement detected could theoretically have been an animal, but that investigators were not ruling anything out. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from its monitoring app on her iPhone. That is the last digital signal to emerge from inside the house. CNN's senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe noted publicly that the pacemaker disconnect likely indicates the moment Nancy was taken far enough from her phone that the Bluetooth connection could no longer hold. The following morning, Nancy did not log on for her weekly virtual church service. A friend who regularly watched the service with her tried to reach her and got no response. The friend contacted the family. At 11:56 a.m., Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni arrived at the house. They found the back doors propped open. There was no sign of Nancy anywhere inside the property or on the surrounding grounds. At 12:03 p.m., they called 911. Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. Two details about what followed in those first hours matter significantly to how this investigation developed. Law enforcement sources told News Nation correspondent Brian Enton that the case was initially treated as a missing person situation rather than an active crime scene. According to those sources, that early framing delayed key forensic steps during the window when evidence is most recoverable. Fox News separately reported that the lead investigator assigned to the Nancy Guthrie case had no prior homicide investigation experience. Both of those details sit at the foundation of the investigative failures that would surface publicly over the weeks and months that followed. When law enforcement processed Nancy Guthrie's home on February 1st, the scene they encountered did not look like the aftermath of a struggle. It looked like a house that had been lived in quietly and left undisturbed. The official description used by investigators was immaculate. Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, speaking to News Nation, identified the blood on the front porch as the single most significant piece of physical evidence in the entire case. His reasoning was precise. It confirms that Nancy sustained an injury at that exact location and at no other visible point inside the residence. The violence, whatever form it took, what happened at the threshold between the inside of the house and the outside world. The back doors were propped open using flower pots taken from Nancy's own patio. Ashley Banfield confirmed this detail through her law enforcement source on News Nation. The pots were not brought from outside. They came from Nancy's property, selected in the dark by someone who knew exactly where they sat and how to use them. What remained inside the house is as telling as what was found outside. Nancy's iPhone was on her nightstand. Her purse was on the counter with cash untouched inside it. Her car sat in the garage. And on the kitchen counter, the evening dose of her heart medication sat exactly where she had left it. The dose was due at approximately 10 p.m. Tommaso had dropped her off at 9:48 p.m., 12 minutes before that dose was due. And the medication was visible, accessible, and within reach of anyone standing in that kitchen. They took nothing from that house except Nancy herself. Investigators also recovered a pair of black gloves found approximately 2 miles from the home. Visually, they matched the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage. DNA from the gloves was submitted for analysis. The preliminary result showed an unknown male profile. That profile was not in KOLD-TV, the FBI's national DNA database, and it did not match any DNA collected from inside the crime scene. Sheriff Nanos later confirmed publicly that the DNA had been traced to a local restaurant worker who was not considered part of the investigation. Separately, DNA recovered from inside the property itself presented a different and more significant forensic challenge. Multiple DNA profiles were mixed together in a single sample. Nanos described the situation to Fox 10 directly. "We have DNA from that scene that is a mixture of DNAs. So we have to separate, hope the lab can do that, and still preserve some of that evidence in case the defense wants to test it should we make an arrest." That biological puzzle remains active and unresolved as of April 2026. 10 days after Nancy disappeared, FBI Director Kash Patel announced that investigators had recovered previously inaccessible video from residual back-end data tied to Nancy's Google Nest doorbell system. The footage, pulled from deep within Google's cloud infrastructure, shows a masked individual approaching the front door, using a gloved hand to cover the camera lens, and positioning foliage in front of it to block the view. A second clip shows the same person walking toward the archway of the home, with their head angled down toward the ground. The FBI released its official physical description of the suspect on February 12th. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, long sleeves, dark pants, a ski mask, gloves, a firearm in a holster at the waist, worn over the jacket rather than integrated underneath it or beneath outerwear. That placement is a tactical error. Anyone with professional weapons training wears a holster that is either on a duty belt or concealed under outer clothing. Wearing it on top of a jacket is an amateur mistake, and it is visible in the footage. It tells investigators something about who they are looking for. The backpack is a black, 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. Sheriff Nanos called it one of the most promising leads in the case. The Ozark Trail line is sold exclusively through Walmart. Walmart provided investigators with purchase records covering all recent Ozark Trail hiker pack sales. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from local Walmart stores. Nanos also stated that the clothing and face mask worn by the suspect were believed to have also been purchased at Walmart. Now look at how that backpack moves in the footage. It is visually full, packed tight, but when the suspect leans forward to cover the camera, the bag does not shift the way a load of rigid equipment would. There is no lateral swing, no imbalance. The weight is even and distributed as though the contents have no hard edges. A kidnap kit, the gear you bring to physically restrain and transport a living person, has weight and rigidity. Rope, zip ties, restraints, tools for securing someone in a vehicle. That kind of load moves differently in a bag. What is in this pack behaves like something flat and folded. Fabric, a tarp, a sheet, something that takes up space without creating hard points. The distinction matters when you consider what the person carrying it intended to do. The ransom notes arrived the following day. The first communications were received on February 2nd by KOLD-TV, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, and on February 3rd by TMZ and a third outlet. The demand was $4 million in Bitcoin, payable to a specific verified on-chain wallet address by 5 p.m. on February 5th. If that deadline passed, the price would escalate to $6 million by February 9th. Inside the first note were two details that piqued immediate FBI interest. The note referenced a specific floodlight at Nancy's property and described it as destroyed. Fox News drone footage confirmed that 2 broken floodlights were visible at the back of the home. The note also specified the exact location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside the house, in a location that was not where one would immediately expect to find it. FBI Special Agent Heath Jonke, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Phoenix field office, confirmed at the February 5th press conference that both the Apple Watch detail and the floodlight reference were present in the note, and that the FBI was reviewing them carefully. Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ, described the note his outlet received as having perfect grammar, structured and layered writing, and said the specificity of the Apple Watch detail had made him increasingly believe the communication was connected to whoever actually took Nancy. Savannah Guthrie confirmed in her March interview with Hoda Kotb that she believes the 2 notes her family responded to are legitimate. On February 4th, the day the Guthrie children released their first video message asking for proof of life, both Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni separately received identical text messages from a VoIP internet phone line. The message read, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction." 3 minutes later, a 9-second call was made to one of them from the same number. Investigators traced the number to a Google account registered to a California man named Derek Colella, 42, from Hawthorne. When FBI agents arrived at his home, Colella admitted sending the messages. He told them he had pulled the family's contact information from a website online and had been following news coverage of the case. He said he was trying to see if the family would respond. Colella was arrested on February 5th and charged with transmitting a ransom demand across state lines and using a telecommunications device to abuse, threaten, or harass. FBI Special Agent Hyth Jonka called him an imposter trying to profit from the situation. Colella was released on a $20,000 bond. His texts to Annie and Tommaso are not linked to the ransom notes sent to media outlets. Federal authorities made that distinction explicitly and publicly. The family responded with video statements. Savannah, Annie, and Cameron appeared together on February 7th and said they had received the message and were ready to pay. The family reward of $1 million was announced on February 24th. The FBI increased its reward to $100,000. 8/8 Crime added $102,500. The combined total exceeded $1.2 million. Both ransom deadlines passed. The money was never collected. No exchange occurred. No proof of life was ever produced. Not a photograph, not a voice recording, not a video of any kind. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore stated publicly that the unclaimed reward is itself meaningful evidence. In outside perpetrator kidnapping cases, a reward of that size almost always produces a witness. Someone adjacent to the crime, a contact, a relative, someone who heard too much. He eventually decides the money outweighs the loyalty. The reward in this case remains unclaimed. Moore's professional assessment is that the silence means the people who know what happened are the people who did it, and they have direct personal stakes in staying quiet. Now back to what was left on that kitchen counter. Nancy's heart medication was due at 10 p.m. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly that Nancy could not survive 24 hours without it. Medical experts who reviewed the case publicly assessed the outer survival limit at approximately 72 hours, given her cardiac condition and her dependence on the pacemaker. If someone took Nancy for ransom, keeping her alive was the entire point of the operation. And the medication sitting on that counter was the single most operationally important item in that house for achieving that goal. 5 seconds. It was right there. It was not taken. That one fact does not have a clean answer inside the ransom theory. If you want to follow where the Bitcoin ransom was actually designed to go and what that routing reveals about who built this plan, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. The next video goes directly there. Every subscriber keeps this investigation visible, in this case in front of people who need to see it. Let us put everything on the table together, not as a recap, as an argument. Each point connects to the next. By the end, the conclusion does not need to be stated. It will already be clear. The medication was left on the kitchen counter. Nancy's evening dose was due at 10 p.m. She was dropped off at 9:48 p.m. The pills were visible, accessible, 12 minutes before the dose was due. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly she could not survive 24 hours without them. Medical experts assessed the outer limit at 72 hours. If someone took Nancy for ransom, keeping her alive was the entire operational requirement. The medication was the most critical item in that house for the success of that plan. 5 seconds to grab. It was not taken. That single fact puts the ransom theory under immediate pressure, but it does not stand alone. The backpack the suspect carried to that front door was full but light. No lateral shift when he leaned forward. No hard edges in the movement. Not the behavior of a bag loaded with restraints, rope, or the tools of holding a living person captive during transport. The weight and distribution of that pack is consistent with something flat and folded. You bring covering material when the person you are removing is not expected to need restraining alive. You bring a kidnap kit when they are. The flower pots taken from Nancy's own patio and used to prop 3 separate access points at the back of the property were not grabbed by someone who had never been there before. 2 pots on one threshold in the dark without hesitation. Someone who knew that patio, someone who had been there before and knew exactly where to reach. The plan called for a rear exit through those propped access points. That was the design route, but the blood is at the front entrance, not the back. The plan changed, not by choice. Something happened inside that house that forced the exit forward and out through the front door. The ransom notes sent to KOLD-TV, TMZ, and a third outlet contained details about the crime scene that had not been released publicly. The specific location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside the house, a floodlight at the back of the property described as destroyed. FBI Special Agent Hoda Kotb confirmed both details at the February 5th press conference. Those details were inside the house on the night Nancy was taken. Either the person who wrote those notes was present during the crime, or they received that information from someone who was. There is no other explanation. You cannot accurately describe the location of an Apple Watch inside a home you have never entered. The combined reward exceeded $1.2 million. The FBI set up a 24-hour tip line that received more than 13,000 calls. Both ransom deadlines passed. The money was never collected. No exchange was ever arranged. No proof of life was ever produced. Not a photograph, not a recording, not a second of audio. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore's professional assessment has not been refuted. In outside perpetrator kidnapping cases, a reward of that size almost always produces a witness. Someone talks. The reward in this case remains unclaimed. The people who know what happened have direct personal stakes in staying quiet. Derek Colella sent fake Bitcoin texts to both Nancy Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni on February 4th, moments after the family released their first video message. Not to Savannah in New York, not to the FBI, to Annie and Tommaso specifically. Colella was arrested and admitted he found their contact information online. He is not linked to the actual crime, but the targeting of that text to the last 2 people who were with Nancy on the night she disappeared is a detail that sits in the record. Now the security gate. Nancy's front door had a heavy metal security gate. Neighbor Laura, who has the same model gate on her own home, told Brian Entin directly, "When those gates are locked, you are not getting through. You are never going to break into that security gate." The suspect in the doorbell footage was standing outside that gate. He was not trying to force it, not pushing against it, not attempting to breach it in any way. He was standing still, waiting. Laura's assessment, shared publicly, was that the suspect was not there to enter through the front. He was there to wait. Someone inside the house was going to bring Nancy out to him. That assessment is supported by retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, who told Brian Entin she believes Nancy was carried out of the residence, not walked out, and that the blood pattern and the absence of footprints suggest at least 2 people were involved in removing her. The camera was manually disconnected at 1:47 a.m. The pacemaker went offline at 2:28 a.m. 41 minutes. Everything happened in that window. And in the 14 hours and 15 minutes between Tommaso watching the garage door close at 9:50 p.m. and the 911 call at 12:03 p.m. the next day, not a single person made a phone call to check on an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker who had gone home alone to a house in the dark. The people who drove her home lived 4 miles away, a 10-minute drive. They did not call, they did not text, they did not check. In a case where the security camera was not recording, where the front gate required someone on the inside to allow access, and where the only person confirmed to have seen Nancy enter that house was Tommaso Cioni, that gap of 14 hours is not a peripheral detail. It is a forensic question that has not been answered. The ransom theory does not survive the medication. The medication does not survive the level of pre-crime preparation the evidence documents. The preparation does not survive the security gate. The gate does not survive 14 hours of silence from the people 4 miles away. The investigation has the mixed DNA. It has the pacemaker data. It has the doorbell footage. It has 13,000 tips. What it does not yet have is a name attached to a charge. If you know anything about what happened in that house between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line is 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1.2 million. No detail is too small. Subscribe to the Whispered Crimes and turn on notifications. The next video in this series follows the money, specifically where the Bitcoin ransom demand was designed to go, what wallet it points to, and what that routing tells investigators about who built this plan. That video is already in production. You will not want to miss it when it drops. Before you go, leave a comment. Does the ransom theory survive what you just heard? This case is not closed, and neither is this channel.